The meaning of life is just to be alive. It is so plain and so obvious and so simple. And yet everybody rushes around in a great panic as if it were necessary to achieve something beyond themselves. Now, have you ever noticed this peculiar modern compulsion to be on? Always on, always ready, always responsive, always productive. We wear our busyness as if it were a badge of honor, don't we? Our calendars have become our testament to our own importance. We feel we must be permanently available to our work, to our devices, to the opinions of others, to the constant nagging chatter of our own restless minds. It's rather like being a shopkeeper who never closes the store. The door is always open, the bell is always ringing, and customers, some wanted, some not, are constantly streaming through. But here's the curious thing. We've forgotten that we are not just the shopkeeper. We are also the merchandise, the cash register, the building itself, and the street on which it sits. You see, this availability we cling to so desperately creates a very particular kind of anxiety. It's a low-grade fever of the soul. This feeling that we must respond, we must fix, we must manage, we must control. We become like those little wind-up toys scurrying about with tremendous energy, but in essentially random directions. There's a beautiful metaphor I'm fond of. We are like the water strider insect skittering frantically across the surface of a pond. The poor creature creates endless ripples and actually believes it is making the pond move. It never pauses, not even for an instant, to sink just 1 inch below the surface to discover the profound still cool depths that have been holding it up all along. Our constant skittering is precisely this availability. It keeps us perpetually on the surface, never experiencing the depth of simply being. We confuse our ripples for reality itself. And what is the consequence of all this surface activity?
Life becomes nothing more than a series of reactions. You are not really living your life. You have become its permanent secretary, frantically managing incoming demands. You confuse the menu for the meal, the schedule for the event, the map for the territory. Think about it for a moment. When did you last have a conversation without planning your response while the other person was still speaking? When did you last eat a meal without simultaneously reading, checking messages, or thinking about what you needed to do next? When did you last simply be without the nagging sense that you should be doing something else? This is the modern predicament. We have become so busy doing life that we have forgotten how to live it. We are like a person who spends so much time polishing his glasses that he never actually looks through them. Now I want to be very clear about something. This is not a moral failing. This is not something to feel guilty about. Guilt, you see, is just another form of availability. Making yourself available to an internal critic who never takes a holiday. No, this is simply what happens when we mistake the finger pointing at the moon for the moon itself. The finger in this case is all our busy activity. The moon is the simple fact of existence itself. This extraordinary, unrepeatable moment that is always, eternally now, but we've become hypnotized by our own pointing. We've fallen into a kind of spell, a collective trance in which we believe that our worth is measured by our responsiveness, our value determined by our productivity, our identity defined by our availability. It's rather like being a radio that's always scanning for stations, but never actually tuning into any particular frequency long enough to hear the music. All we get is static and the occasional fragment of melody. Enough to keep us searching but never enough to satisfy. And here's the really curious part. The more available we make ourselves, the less present we actually become. The more we try to be everywhere, the less we are anywhere. The more we attempt to respond to everything, the less we can truly hear anything. This is the great paradox of our time. In our effort to connect with everything, we have disconnected from the one thing that matters most, this immediate, intimate, infinitely rich experience of being alive right here, right now. Now, when I speak of stopping being available, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not suggesting you become lazy, irresponsible, or neglectful of your loved ones. I'm not advocating that you quit your job and move to a cave in the mountains. Unless, of course, that's what spontaneously arises from your deeper understanding. No, what I'm pointing to is something far more subtle and paradoxically far more radical. I'm talking about stopping being available for what we might call the tyranny of the trivial. Stopping being available for the ego's endless rehearsal of past regrets and future anxieties. Stopping making yourself available for the exhausting belief that you are the separate manager of this incredible unfolding universe. This brings us to a concept that the Chinese have understood for thousands of years. Wu-wei. Wu-wei literally means non-doing or not forcing. But it doesn't mean inaction. It means acting in accordance with the natural flow of things rather than against it. Think of sailing. A skilled sailor doesn't push the boat through the water with his bare hands. That would be absurd, wouldn't it? Instead, he trims the sail to catch the wind that is already blowing. He cooperates with forces that are infinitely more powerful than his individual will. To stop being available in the deepest sense is to stop trying to push the boat of your life through the water with your bare hands. It's about learning to feel for the wind, the natural flow of existence, and adjusting your sail accordingly.
There's a wonderful story about a farmer who was so eager for his crops to grow that he went out at night and tried to pull them up by hand to make them grow faster. Of course, he killed them all. Growth, you see, happens through non-interference, through providing the right conditions and then getting out of the way. In the same way, the most profound changes in our lives happen not through our forcing and efforting and managing, but through our willingness to create space for what wants to emerge naturally. Now, here's another beautiful image. The empty mirror. A mirror, if you think about it, is completely unavailable in a very particular way. It doesn't cling to the image of a beautiful woman who looks into it. It doesn't resist the image of a frightening monster. It holds both with perfect impartiality and then lets them go the moment they pass. It is precisely because the mirror is unavailable for judgment that it can be available for perfect clarity. It doesn't editorialize about what it reflects. It simply reflects. Can you be like that? Can you reflect your experience without immediately rushing to fix it, improve it, or escape from it? Can you be unavailable for the constant internal commentary about whether what's happening should be happening? This is what I mean by the art of non-doing. It's not about becoming passive or indifferent. It's about discovering that there's a profound difference between responding and reacting. Reaction is automatic, mechanical, predictable. Response arises from a deeper place, from stillness rather than anxiety, from presence rather than habit. When you stop being available for the mechanical patterns of reaction, space opens up for genuine response. And genuine response is always fresh, always appropriate to the actual situation rather than to your ideas about the situation. Think of it this way. Most of our availability is really a form of unavailability. We're so available to our thoughts about life that we're completely unavailable to life itself. We are so available to our plans for the conversation that we're unavailable to the person we're actually talking to. We're so available to our agenda for the day that we're unavailable to the day itself. True availability, the kind that actually serves life, comes through a very particular kind of unavailability. It comes through being unavailable to the voice in your head that's always commenting, always judging, always preparing the next move. It's rather like learning to listen to music. If you're constantly thinking about the music, analyzing it, comparing it to other pieces you've heard, you're not really listening at all. To truly hear the music, you have to become unavailable to your thoughts about the music and available to the music itself. The Chinese have another wonderful phrase for this. Fasting of the mind. Not depriving the mind of food, but allowing it to rest from its constant consumption of thoughts, worries, plans, and judgments. When the mind fasts in this way, something extraordinary happens. You discover that you are not the desperate manager you thought you were. You are not the anxious controller constantly trying to make everything work out according to your preferences. When you stop being the frantic actor on the stage, the one who's constantly trying to remember his lines, hit his marks, and please the audience, something miraculous happens. You get to become the audience yourself. You sit back, not in withdrawal or detachment, but in wonder, and you watch the most astonishing play unfold. And this play, you gradually realize, is your own life. But now you're seeing it with fresh eyes, as if for the first time. The anxiety of performing vanishes. You become available for wonder. Available for the sheer improbability of existence itself. Available for what the mystics have always known, that ordinary life, seen clearly, is absolutely extraordinary. You see, when you stop being available as the manager of your life, you have the chance to discover who is actually the owner of the factory. You find that your fundamental self is not the busy striver you thought you were, but something much vaster, much more mysterious. In one of those beautiful phrases that seem to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, we might say, you are that vast thing that you see far, far off with great telescopes. You are not the small separate self frantically skittering across the surface of the pond. You are the pond itself. This is not a metaphor, not a comforting belief, not a philosophical position. This is what you discover when the static of constant availability finally quiets down enough for you to hear the deeper signal. And when this recognition dawns, even briefly, even partially, everything changes in the most delightful way. Those things that used to bother the manager so much, traffic jams, cancelled plans, critical comments, unexpected delays, these suddenly reveal themselves as something quite different. They're no longer interruptions to your story. They become the story. They become fascinating phenomena of nature, as impersonal and interesting as thunderstorms or falling leaves. You realize that they only bothered the you that was available to be bothered, but that you was always a kind of fictional character anyway, a role you were playing so convincingly that you forgot it was a role. When that character takes a bow and steps off stage, what remains? Not nothing. Oh no, not nothing at all. What remains is everything. What remains is this immediate, intimate, infinite presence that you've always been but somehow overlooked in all your busy availability. It's rather like those optical illusions where you're looking for the hidden image and you strain and strain trying to see it, and then suddenly you relax and there it is. It was there all along but you were trying too hard to see it. Life becomes like this when you stop being available to be the one who has to figure it all out. The hidden image of existence reveals itself and you realize it was never really hidden. You were just looking in the wrong way. The world ceases to be your opponent and becomes your dance partner. Events stop happening to you and start happening as you. The boundaries between the dancer and the dance, the observer and the observed, the liver and the life, begin to dissolve in the most natural way. This is not a philosophy or a belief system. This is simply what's revealed when the static clears. It's what's always been the case. But we've been too busy being available for our story about what's the case to notice what's actually the case. And here's perhaps the most beautiful part of all. This recognition doesn't separate you from ordinary life. It transforms ordinary life into something extraordinary. You don't transcend the human condition. You discover what the human condition actually is when it's not filtered through the anxiety of constant availability. Washing dishes becomes a meditation. Sitting in traffic becomes a concert of urban rhythms. Conversations become improvisational dances. Even your own thoughts and emotions become like weather patterns, interesting, ever-changing, not particularly personal. You find yourself living in a kind of benevolent conspiracy where everything, absolutely everything, seems to be cooperating in the most ingenious and humorous ways. Not because you've imposed this view on reality, but because you finally stopped imposing any view at all. Now, you might be wondering, this all sounds very beautiful, very poetic, but how does one actually live this way? How do you practice this unavailability in a world that seems to demand constant availability? Now, this is where we get practical, but practical in the most impractical way imaginable. Start small, very small, for just 5 minutes. Yes, only 5 minutes. Stop being available to your own thoughts. Don't try to stop them. That would be like trying to stop the wind by building a wall. Instead, simply stop attending their meeting. Let them chatter away in the conference room next door while you step outside for a coffee break. Listen to the birds instead, or the traffic, or the sound of your own breathing. These are not more important than your thoughts, but they're not less important either. And they're happening now, not in the remembered past or the imagined future. This, my friends, is meditation. Not the complicated, technique-heavy version that requires special cushions and breathing patterns. Just this stepping outside the meeting of your own thoughts and noticing what else is going on. But here's the really practical part. What if you brought this same quality to your external availability? What if you didn't immediately say yes to every request? Not to be difficult or uncooperative, but to create a small space between the stimulus and your response. What if you let the phone ring 3 times before answering? What if you took a breath, a real breath, before jumping into conversation? What if you allowed a moment of silence instead of rushing to fill every conversational gap? You are not being rude when you do this. You are making space for a more genuine response to emerge from the depths rather than an automatic reaction from the surface. This is how you trim the sail to catch the wind of wu-wei. You create just enough space for something other than habit to move through you. I remember a story about a master archer who could split an arrow with another arrow from 100 paces. A student asked him, "Master, what is your secret technique?" The archer replied, "When I draw the bow, I become unavailable to hit the target. Then the arrow finds its own way." This is the paradox we're dancing with. By becoming unavailable to force the outcome, we become available for the outcome to manifest naturally, spontaneously, appropriately. In conversation, this might mean becoming unavailable to impress the other person, which creates space to actually connect with them. In work, it might mean becoming unavailable to the anxiety of success or failure, which allows your natural competence to flow unimpeded. In relationship, this is perhaps most beautiful of all. When you stop being available for the exhausting project of managing how others see you, you become available for the extraordinary intimacy of being seen as you actually are. But let me be very clear. This is not a technique to get what you want. This is not a spiritual strategy for success. The moment you make unavailability into another form of availability, available to get results, available to become enlightened, available to fix your problems, you've missed the point entirely. The point is not to achieve unavailability. The point is to recognize that you are unavailability. The open space in which all availability comes and goes. You see, ultimately, all our busy availability is happening within something that is itself unavailable to be caught, managed, or controlled. Call it consciousness, call it awareness, call it the present moment, call it what you like. It's the unchanging background against which all change occurs. When you recognize yourself as this background rather than as the constantly changing foreground, a tremendous relaxation occurs. Not the relaxation of collapse or indifference, but the relaxation of coming home to what you've always been. From this recognition, action arises spontaneously, appropriately, effortlessly, not because you've made it happen, but because you've stopped making it not happen. This is what I call the sincerity of spontaneity. When you're no longer trying to be sincere, sincerity flows naturally. When you're no longer trying to be spontaneous, spontaneity becomes your natural state. It's like learning to ride a bicycle. At first, you try very hard to balance and you wobble all over the place. But eventually, you stop trying to balance and you just balance. The bicycle wants to stay upright. You just have to stop interfering with its natural tendency. Life, it turns out, wants to live itself through you. You just have to stop interfering with its natural tendency. So, you see, the great paradox reveals itself in the end. By stopping being available for the superficial, you become utterly available for the profound. You become available for this moment. Just this, the sound of my voice reaching your ears right now. The feeling of air moving in and out of your lungs. The mysterious fact that there is something rather than nothing. And that something includes this very experience of being here, being alive, being aware. When you are no longer chasing the extraordinary, the ordinary reveals itself as extraordinary. That is the great change. That is the homecoming. You discover that you were never really away. The traffic jam becomes a meditation on patience. The crying child becomes a teaching on unconditional presence. The difficult conversation becomes a dance of mutual discovery. The boring task becomes a prayer of simple attention. Not because you've convinced yourself that these things are profound, but because you've stopped convincing yourself that they are not. This is what happens when the water strider finally sinks that 1 inch below the surface. It doesn't drown. It discovers that it's always been held by something infinitely more reliable than its own frantic skittering. You discover that you don't have to hold life together. Life holds itself together quite beautifully. Thank you very much. And life includes you not as its anxious manager, but as one of its most marvelous expressions. What a relief! What an extraordinary relief to discover that the universe doesn't need your constant supervision. That the sun rises without your help. That your heart beats without your permission. That the seasons change, the tides turn, and the earth spins through space in perfect order, all without requiring your availability. And in that relief, something else becomes available. Joy becomes available. Not the joy that depends on circumstances, but the joy that is circumstance, the sheer improbable joy of existence itself. Wonder becomes available. The kind of wonder that a child feels looking at a butterfly, but with the depth that comes from understanding just how impossible and magnificent this whole cosmic dance really is. Love becomes available. Not love as a transaction or a project or an achievement, but love as recognition. The recognition that there is only one thing happening here, expressing itself as many, playing hide-and-seek with itself in the most ingenious ways. And perhaps most beautifully of all, you become available to others in a completely new way. Not as the person who needs something from them or has something to prove to them, but as the space in which they can discover what they've always been, but perhaps temporarily forgotten. Thank you for not being available to all the things that would have prevented you from hearing this. And thank you for being available to recognize, perhaps for just a moment, the extraordinary nature of this very ordinary moment. And now, having heard all these words about unavailability, perhaps the most authentic thing you could do is to stop being available for words altogether and simply be. Just be. The rest will take care of itself. It always has.